Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
President Trump was correct. Is the man ever wrong?
You got to go after the root of the tree, and we have to ban Islam. And some would say, well, isn't Islam protected? That religion is by definition contrary to our own laws, not just the spirit of our laws, not just our culture, but it's against our laws.
In a recent article, Larry Alex Taunton argues that diplomatic, military, and political choices in the West played a role in shaping the environment surrounding October 7th.
The Biden administration, very specifically, they played both arsonist and fireman as it relates to October 7th and as it relates to Iran. Iran attacked or aided in the attack of American troops 83 times in Biden's first 2.5 years in office, just in that period alone. And it's like the Biden administration said, you know what? We're so grateful that you're killing our troops. We're going to reward you.
(2028), this is our last chance. We need in 2026 for this administration to be shut the fuck down. What does this administration do other than cover up the Epstein files, embezzle money through government contracts, and bring us to war for Israel? This administration needs to be shut down immediately.
Well, my takeaway is that, he's not worth listening to. He's ignorant. He's full of hate. He's in no way represents anything on the right.
The October 7 attacks on Israel reshaped the conversation about security in the Middle East. But beyond the immediate violence, some analysts are asking a deeper question. Did Western policy decisions in the years leading up to the attacks contribute to the strategic conditions that made them possible? Was that the case? In a recent article, Larry Alex Taunton argues that diplomatic, military, and political choices in the West played a role in shaping the environment surrounding October 7. That's a serious claim, my friends, and one worth unpacking carefully. Larry is an author, a cultural commentator, and host Ideas Have Consequences. Joining me now on the show is Larry Taunton.
Pleasure to be with you.
Listen, you wrote a masterful piece for the Federalist. I want to pull that up now, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about it. This piece that you wrote, I think more people need to gain an understanding about what took place on October 7. More people need to know about this. The first question that I have for you is, in your Federalist piece, what do you mean by saying the West aided and abetted the October 7 attacks?
John, authors never get to title their own articles. So I would have titled it much more specifically, the Biden administration, no doubt, probably at the urging of Obama, but the Biden administration, very specifically, they played both arsonist and fireman as it relates to October 7th and as it relates to Iran. And the way that they did this was because they released funds that had been frozen by Trump in his first presidential terms. More than $6 billion that went to Iran. They also helped the United Nations, the UNRWA, which is a United Nations organization that works in Gaza, and it really is a voice for an arm of Hamas, but their monies came primarily from the United States. And then, of course, the Biden administration also ended oil embargoes against Iran, allowing Iran to increase their exports by 80%. 98%. And of course, what do they do with this money? They funded October 7th. They funded Hamas. They trained many of the Hamas fighters. They gave them technological sophistication to carry out the attacks. And this is to say nothing of the fact that, I mean, the Obama administration, I mean, think about this. Iran attacked or aided in the attack of American troops 83 times in Biden's first 2.5 years in office, just in that period alone. And it's like the Biden administration said, you know what? We're so grateful that you're killing our troops. We're going to reward you.
You know, that's insane. And what do you think about the former administration? Of course, we all recall, I believe it was President Obama who gave Iran, what was it, $1.7 billion?
That's right. Everybody knows about the pallets of cash. You know, that's going around all over on social media, the images of that, the literal pallets of cash that required forklifts to load onto planes and send to Iran. Everybody knows about that, but the Biden administration gave them far more than that, many times more than that. And my own feeling about the Biden administration, I chuckled when you asked the question, because I'm inclined, John, to use expletives when you ask me about the Biden administration. I think the Biden administration was a very corrupt, illegitimate administration. And I think Biden himself was basically just an empty suit who was for sale to anybody. I don't know that Biden himself has any I mean, now there's probably hardly anything going on in his head, but I don't know that Biden himself was devoted to any particular ideology. I just think he was for sale.
What specific Western policies do you believe most influenced the strategic environment before October 7th?
Well, I think that one of the big things that's happening, John, that's changing the climate in the Middle East and in America is the fact that for decades, post-World War II, post-creation of the State of Israel in 1948, I think Israelis could rest in comfort knowing that the United States had their back. The United States was very supportive. Didn't mean we endorsed everything they did or agreed with everything they did, but they could, in the macro level, they could count on American support. That's changing. And why is that changing? I think it's changing for two things, for two reasons. The first is that Muslims have learned, Arab countries have learned, Muslim majority countries have learned to crack the code on the United States path to political power. They know that jihadism, Islam, doesn't sell well in the United States, but they see the same polls that you and I see, John, and they know that socialism does. And so they're using socialism as a Trojan horse to hide their jihadists in. You know, people like, you know, Ilhan Omar and Mandani, Saqib Khan in London, and numerous others. They're all masquerading as individuals who have a concern for the poor and the fair and equitable redistribution of wealth and this kind of thing. But they're fifth columnists. I mean, they are jihadists. So that's one of the things that's changed, and that's affecting American, policy in the Middle East. Second is they've never found their own Benjamin Netanyahu, someone who's charismatic and liked by and large by Americans, and has been a voice for Israel directly to the American people for decades. I can remember seeing him on Nightline back in the 80s when I was in high school. So he's been doing that for a long time. Muslims have never found that guy, but they have learned they can buy universities. They can buy an army of bots and influencers on social media. I mean, just post anything positive about Israel and see how long it takes for your timeline to be just full of vile.
Well, you know what? Hold it here, Larry. You just keyed in on something. Not too long ago, I made a statement at a TPUSA event about Candace Owens, okay, speaking and addressing much of what she was doing to diminish the legacy of Charlie Kirk. She said that she wanted to burn down TPUSA, and even what she's doing now with Erica Kirk is just a travesty. And I noticed that for the next 2.5 weeks, my X timeline was inundated daily, I mean daily, with bot messages. These people would have 2 followers, 10 followers, 100 followers, 50 followers, but they were saying some of the most asinine things out there. Now, there are many people who talk about these bots, but is this real? Are these individuals hiring entities or marketing agencies to release bots on people?
You've probably seen images of this, just rooms full of, phones that are hooked up. And part of the way you can notice them is one of the things you just said, John, is they have 2 followers, and all the messages seem to be the same. But you'll also notice that a lot of the messaging is very, very similar from one bot to another. Also, I mean, there's a lot of, rumor about whether or not people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, maybe Megyn Kelly, are actual, financial beneficiaries. I don't know if that's true or not. But what I do know is that Arabs have learned what I call the soft use of monetary power. And that's just simply, if you recall, Tucker Carlson was invited, to Qatar and on this speaking tour of the Middle East, and they wined him and tined him and stroked his ego and told him how wonderful he is. Did they actually say, hey, here's a contract where you'll say what we want you to say? I doubt it, but they probably paid him very generous speaking honoraria. And having left there, I think they know that their influence with him is very, very strong. Same with Russia.
Let me show you this clip of Nick Fuentes, and then I want to get your reaction to it. Play this video.
All of those people, with some exceptions, were never Trumpers in 2016. Shapiro didn't vote for Trump in 2016. Mark Levin was critical of Trump in 2016. Where were these people when the movement was actually born, when those pillars were in place? Now all of those people are in the center. The movement is something else now. And what we need in 2028, this is our last chance. We need in 2026 for this administration to be shut the fuck down. What does this administration do other than cover up the Epstein files, embezzle money through government contracts, and bring us to war for Israel? This administration needs to be shut down immediately. Do not vote in the midterms. And if you do, vote for Democrats. That is what the Republicans deliver. That is what our golden age looks like. The tariffs were refunded. The deportations were stopped. They wound down and withdrew the ICE from Minneapolis. What does this administration do other than embezzle money, go to war with Iran, and bury the Epstein files? Oh, and blackmail Harvard so they police anti-Semitism and ban people who criticize Israel from being in America. This administration needs to be shut down immediately. It has forfeited its mandate. They promise no new wars. They promise mass deportations in America first, and we're not getting any of it. So shut it down. In 2026, shut it down. And our only hope is that in 2028, in the Republican primary, somebody will emerge who will actually put America first. I am not voting for the vice president and the secretary of state that brought us to war in Iran. I won't do it. 2026, shut it down. You got to burn the house down with them inside, metaphorically. And in 28, you better hope that somebody has a prayer to run the Trump strategy and do another hostile takeover over the GOP. Otherwise, I'm going to become a Democrat. Like, at that point, rather than be beholden to this country, that is our last chance.
What we see from this video clearly is that, people like Nick Fuentes has an ideological problem and an animus towards President Trump, conservative belief systems and ideologies. and it's diabolical. What is your takeaway from what he just said?
Well, my takeaway is that, he's not worth listening to. He's ignorant. He's full of hate. He's in no way represents anything on the right. Honestly, he comes off sounding like a demagogue to me. And the impression I get from just clips like this that I've seen of him is that he's a fascist. So this isn't anybody who needs to be giving marching orders to any conservatives. And I thought that he said it. I thought he told us exactly who he was when he was saying you should vote for Democrats, and he was going to become a Democrat. So there you go.
The Islamification of the United States of America is underway as we speak. And no, it doesn't make me an Islamophobe or a xenophobe or a racist or a bigot to say so. Just as it didn't make President Trump Islamophobic in 2015 when he called for a complete and total shutdown of Muslim immigration to our country until we figure out what the hell is going on. Take a listen to the president 11 years ago.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
In fact, President Trump was correct. Is the man ever wrong? For decades, thanks to the immigration system built by corrupt politicians in both parties, Republican and Democrat, you and I have been subject to mass migration, some illegal, some legal. The fact that a sizable portion of the mass migration is legal should not comfort you, however. It is a testament to nothing but the stupidity, the recklessness of our political elite. The individuals, many of the individuals who have been allowed into our nation, albeit some legally, nonetheless pose an enormous threat to us, to our families, our communities, our culture, and the safety and security of our nation because of their religious fanaticism, their practice of the religion of Islam. We saw this firsthand this weekend when a 54-year-old man from Senegal, N'Jaga Diagne, a legal immigrant who became a naturalized citizen despite his adherence to radical Islamist ideology, opened fire and murdered 3 innocent Americans because these Americans were Americans. In his mind, they were also infidels. The belief of the religion of Islam labels anyone who doesn't adhere to the religion of Islam as an infidel. And the religion of Islam demands that infidels be forced to convert to Islam or be brutally murdered. This tragedy in Austin, Texas this weekend, unfortunately, was not an anomaly. It wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't just a nutcase with mental illness. It certainly wasn't because of Texas gun laws. The motive behind the shooting, despite the Wall Street Journal's ridiculous subheadline, which reads, "Police still looking for a motive, say N'Jaga Diagne had Iranian image on clothing during Sunday assault." The motive was actually obvious. N'Jaga Diagne killed in the name of the religion of Islam. He carried the Quran in his car. He wore a t-shirt that read "Property of Allah." You can't be more obvious than this. So the question that we face today, you and I, how many more N'Jaga Diagnes are in the United States as we speak? How many more of these Islamist terror attacks are in the works? How many more Americans will be killed by Islamist terrorists in our own country before our politicians acknowledge this reality, the threat against us, and take action to stop it? Listen, back in August of 2024, the House Judiciary Committee's subcommittee on Immigration, Integrity, Security, and Enforcement issued a report. This is how it is reported by the Federalist. The Biden administration released this report, or the Biden administration released into American communities nearly 100 illegal aliens on the terror watch list. The report, titled "Terror at Our Door: how the Biden-Harris administration's open border policies undermine national security and endanger Americans, found that Biden's DHS encountered more than 250 illegal immigrants on the terror watch list between fiscal years 2021 and 2023 and released at least 99 of them into the United States. Let me repeat myself. The Biden administration's DHS encountered hundreds of individuals on the terror watch list crossing our border illegally, attempting to infiltrate our country in violation of our laws, and released 99 of these terror watch list suspects into our neighborhoods. The Federalist continues. In June, a senior U.S. Customs and Border Protection source told Fox News that Biden's DHS arrested more than 1,500 Iranian nationals between fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 2024, releasing 729 of the illegal immigrants into the United States. Again, let me repeat. 1,500 Iranian nationals were captured by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, 729 of whom are now roaming free in our neighborhoods, our cities. The Federalist continues. It's unclear how many of the Iranians released into the U.S. were on the terrorism watch list. Get this. As the Biden administration repeatedly denied Fox News's Freedom of Information Act requests and appeals for the data, the Biden administration reportedly was concerned about the privacy of the Iranians on the list and determined that there was minimal public interest in the information as reasons to reject Fox News's records request. Let me get this straight. The Iranians that entered our country tried to do so illegally. They were captured by federal law enforcement. They were released into our nation, which is both reckless and asinine. And yet, when Fox News requested for the safety of the American people so that we could be aware of what we face, how many of those illegal aliens from Iran released into our streets were on the terror watch list, Biden's Department of Homeland Security was more concerned about the privacy of these criminals than your safety. The Federalist continues. There could be many more Iranian nationals in the U.S. It's not clear from which countries the 2 million known quote-unquote gotaways escaping custody at the border during the Biden years originated. Some 10 million people illegally crossed U.S. borders in the Biden years, the brunt of them entering the Southwest. Many were caught and released with very little in the way of background vetting. Iranians, according to DHS, have been listed as special interest aliens. They're called SIAs, non-U.S. individuals that pose a national security risk, often employing travel patterns known or evaluated to possibly have a nexus to terrorism. That, again, is according to the Department of Homeland Security. How many of these individuals are roaming free in our streets, plotting, planning to kill us? We don't know. Because the Biden Department of Homeland Security would not tell us. This, by the way, is narrowly focused on simply Iranian threats, or those 99 individuals on the terror watch list who were released into our country. That doesn't even count the tens of thousands who have arrived from other high-risk countries. 33,000 from China, 3,000 from Uzbekistan, 2,000 from Afghanistan, and I could go on and on. That was fiscal year 2024 alone. And what do our politicians do about it? As you and I sit here like the proverbial sitting ducks, we have a jarring reminder of what politicians think of us. Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, testified today before the Senate Judiciary Committee, reminding the American people that the Department of Homeland Security is at this moment not able to track down these threats to protect the American people because the Democrats in the United States Congress have refused to fund DHS. Take a look.
The latest Democrat-led shutdown of DHS is reckless, it's unnecessary, and it undermines the American national security, and it harms the men and women who work at DHS and their families. Despite the House passing a bipartisan, bicameral full-year DHS funding bill, it is Senate Democrats who've chosen not to fund the department and have held this department hostage. As a result, critical national security missions, including border security, immigration enforcement, aviation security, disaster response, cybersecurity, and the protection of critical infrastructure are all being strained. Our ability to provide for a safe and successful World Cup is being hindered as well. More than 100,000 dedicated DHS employees are once again being asked to work without pay for the third time in just 5 months. At a time when we've produced the most secure border in history and removed nearly 3 million illegal aliens from our country, disrupting the department responsible for those gains is indefensible. I want to thank the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security for their professionalism, for their dedication, for their commitment to keeping America safe and continuing to show up and work even though they aren't being compensated for it. They've kept us safe and they have patience, and our success is only possible because of their service and sacrifices.
Imagine that. The Islamification of the United States is underway, and Democrat politicians in the United States Congress refuse to fund the agency primarily responsible for keeping us safe. That's just illegal aliens that we mentioned before. The 1,500 Iranians, 729 of whom have been released by the Biden administration into our neighborhoods. The 99 individuals on the terror watch list who likewise were released into our streets, our cities, our towns, our states, our country. What are they doing? Who are they? Where are they? Who do they communicate with? What are they planning for? What are they plotting? We don't know. What we do know is that an incredible number of Muslims in the United States weren't born here. According to recent data, most U.S. Muslim adults, and again, we're not just talking about illegal aliens. This is also thanks to the legal immigration system built by stupid and corrupt politicians on both sides of the aisle that has allowed the mass migration of Muslims to our nation. Most U.S. Muslim adults, 58%, weren't born here in the United States. They came here from other parts of the world. And the reason that this number has grown so exponentially in recent decades is because of the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act that lowered barriers to immigration. It allowed people from Asia and Africa and other regions outside Europe to come to the United States more easily, despite the threats their nation or the ideology of their people pose to our culture, to our people, and to the safety and security of our country. When I talk about the number of Muslims in the United States growing exponentially since the year 2000, Muslim immigrants into the United States, half of them have arrived since the year 2000. Think about the year 2000, Y2K. 9/11 happened the next year. Since then, half, 56% of the total population of Muslims in our country have arrived since then, which means that this was expedited, not just under a Democrat administration, but under a Republican administration, the Bush administration. In total, 63% of all Muslims in our country are immigrants. 15% are the children of immigrants. These are enormous numbers, and it's a deliberate political decision to allow this to happen. And again, I'll repeat this till the cows come home. To quote Hillary Clinton, it does not make me an Islamophobe or a xenophobe or a racist or a bigot to point this out because of the ideology held by Muslims in our country. A Pew Research poll from 2007 found 26% of young Muslims, that's Muslims between the ages of 18 and 29, here in the United States of America, believe that suicide bombings are justified. That's more than 1 in 4. In 2015, a polling company research project found that 19% of Muslim Americans, that's 1 out of every 5, say that violence is justified in order to make Sharia law the law of the land in the United States. Is this assimilation? Are these people Americans? Are we supposed to trust them? Are we supposed to feel safe that they have infiltrated our cities and our neighborhoods and our schools? 25% of Muslim Americans say that violence against Americans in the United States is justified as part of the global jihad. We felt the effect of this over the weekend 3 of our fellow countrymen were murdered because they're Americans, because they're infidels, because Muslims in America, whether they're gotaways that were undetected during the Biden administration's open borders fiasco, whether they were momentarily captured before released into the United States again by Biden, or whether they're supposedly legal migrants who have been allowed here despite the obvious threats to our safety that exists in their ideological and religious beliefs. They're everywhere. And I want to bring on a man who is an expert in the Islamification of the United States. He's the author and host of Ideas Have Consequences, Larry Alex Taunton. Larry, good to see you again. Thanks for coming back on the show.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Liz.
All right, Larry, talk to me about this. I feel like this was a topic that, as we played that video from President Trump back in 2015, this was a topic that was discussed more in 2015, 2016, when we were having that spate of radical Islamist attacks here in the United States. We were witnessing these Islamist attacks in Europe. It went out of fashion to talk about this for a little while. During the first Trump administration, we had other things to focus on. And yet the problem not only was not eliminated, it seems to have increased. What are we facing here today?
Well, I think a major problem here, Liz, is that Americans really don't, Westerners in general, really don't understand Islam. So as I'm talking to you, I'm presently in Europe. And as we were chatting, before the show, before this, I was in Paris. I went into, should have sent you some of the video, actually. I went into some of the no-go zones of Paris, where I was, surreptitiously filming what goes on in these kind of places. These are future, places like Minneapolis, Dearborn, they're future no-go zones, already no-go zones, and they're future Gazas. They're kind of places that become staging areas, for terrorist attacks, or the kind of places where terrorists flee to when they're attacked. This is what happened in Paris after Charlie Hebdo attacks and the Bataclan, where more than 100 were killed by Islamic terrorists. And before that, I was in Israel and at Gaza. And let me tell you, Islam is an ideology of conquest. And I know that there are a lot of people who think, this is my own, argument, and I'm trying to get this to the powers that be. But senator from my own state, Tommy Tuberville, somebody who, I like a lot more as a senator than I did when he was the coach at Auburn. But Tommy Tuberville has been pushing for, and he's gathering some momentum for banning of Sharia law. I can appreciate that. But you got to go after the root of the tree, and we have to ban Islam. And some would say, well, isn't Islam protected, as a religion, the freedom of religion? My argument is no, it is not. And it's because when Islam is taken seriously, and by seriously, I mean that they take their holy literature seriously more than, say, Methodists do the Bible. That's just a joke. It's just a joke, Methodists. Don't get too upset about that. But Muslims are supposed to model their life after Muhammad, who was a murderer. They were supposed to, as a pedophile. They're supposed to read the Quran. They're supposed to read the Hadith. They're supposed to do the things that are commanded in it. And what we call radicals aren't really radicals, Liz. They're Orthodox Muslims. And when you practice that religion according to those three things, which is what Orthodox Islam is, it is by definition anti-constitutional. And that's because it doesn't believe in freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of petition, freedom of press. It doesn't believe in any of those things. So that religion is by definition contrary to our own laws, not just the spirit of our laws, not just our culture, but it's against our laws.
Back in 2015, as I said, when we were having this conversation more often, there was a defense that we would often hear from Democrats that the terrorists who killed in the name of the religion of Islam were religious fanatics. They were misinterpreting the Quran, that was not the understanding of the vast majority of Muslims in the world. And I have to tell you, Larry, I never bought that from the left.
Good
but
for you.
I do think it's worth discussing now, because you will hear that same defense from people who don't want to acknowledge the reality of the Islamification of the United States. They don't want to acknowledge the motivation of these terror attacks that continue to be waged against the United States. They'll tell you that Muslims are inherently peaceful and that anybody can falsely kill in the name of a religion, and that doesn't mean that that religion should be vilified. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned 2015, because 2015 is when the Charlie Hebdo attacks were and when the Bataclan attacks were, I think in January or February, and then again in November. And in that year, the very thing you're talking about, there were attacks on Christianity saying, but the Crusades, I mean, Christians are violent, and which of course is ridiculous. Speaking as a historian, the Crusades, the Muslim invasion of Europe preceded the Crusades by almost 400 years. So it took Europeans a while to decide that maybe it's time we go after the root of the issue. But anyway, I wrote a piece for USA Today that went viral. It was called, they gave it a weird title, something like Christianity and Islam are not comparable for SEO reasons. Next thing I know, I get a call from Al Jazeera saying, we would love for you to come and debate your article on Al Jazeera. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll do this. The next thing you know, I'm getting a call from then Senator Jeff Sessions and Jay Sekulow, who are saying, Larry, don't do this. You will get death threats from, are they airing it around the world across all their platforms? I said, yeah. They said that the audience will be 260 million. They said, you will get death threats from every AK-47 wielding terrorist in the world. But I decided to do it anyway, because I know so many Christians who are persecuted in the third world. And I thought, just because somebody's making threats at me seems to be kind of a candy ass sort of, excuse me, I'm going to get you banned on whatever platform you're on. But I thought, I can't do that. I have to go and do this. And it was interesting because one of the people who was involved in the debate with a Muslim cleric was the late Dan Dennett. Dan Dennett was a scientist at Tufts University, a Molotov cocktail tossing atheist, hated Christianity, hated religion in general. But even he said during the debate, he said, if I, with Larry, we have some kind of disagreement here, he's not going to kill me. But you people, I mean, this is your religion. And I thought it was fascinating, Liz, that at one point during the debate, if someone turns to me, I'm the Christian, in this, and it was kind of a setup, the whole thing was sort of a setup. But, the Crusades came up, and I said to them what I just said to you, but I also said, as I recall, it wasn't Amish who flew those planes into the sides of those buildings. I don't think that ever appeared in the debate when they aired it. So, I mean, again, there's this carefully guarded a truth of what Islam actually is. And I just wrote a piece for the Federalist, which is about the October 7th attacks. It was just published on Friday, so less than a week ago. And I'm trying to make clear to people, do you understand what happened on October 7th? Most Americans have no idea what took place then, and how rape, murder, mutilation wasn't random. It was part of the strategy. And just as you said of this guy in Austin, Texas, they carried Qurans. Why did they carry them? To reassure themselves that when they're raping a woman, when they're dismembering her, when they're cutting her breasts off, these are things that happened. Putting babies in ovens, that they could reassure themselves it's all in Allah's will.
It's horrendous. It's so horrendous. I said yesterday on the show, I think sometimes at least a part of the American electorate forgets how many Americans were murdered on October 7th. If that type of terror attack had happened here, what was it, 46 or 47 Americans who were killed by Hamas? If that had happened here, this would be, we would be rocked to the core as a society by the enormity of this number of people being murdered. And yet, because they had their footprints in a different country at that time, people dismiss it. It's not tangible to them. They can't feel it. They can't taste it. They can't smell it. The fear is separate from the reality for them.
Liz, can I respond to that? Can I respond to that quickly? it was interesting because I went with the IDF and the special forces down to Gaza. There was no attempt to prevent me from seeing anything or answering any questions. And I got a battlefield tour of October 7th, what took place then. And it was, it's heartbreaking what took place. But for those out there who are going, well, I don't care anything about Israel, here's the point. And you just made a hint at it right there, Liz. What has happened on October 7th, that's what's going to start happening from Minneapolis's. And that's what I mean when I say that Minneapolis's and Dearborn's are future Gazas. See, what Gaza is a landmass that is comparable to Israel, what California is to the rest of the United States. And it is a base of operation against Israel. That's what it is. It's just a constant base of operation against Israel. Now, last year, I was in Cairo to find out the Palestinian, perspective over there, what the Egyptians thought of them. They don't want any of them. They have a serious wall. They don't want any of them. But what I stumbled upon was that USAID, which you may recall that Elon Musk was exposing that USAID was almost certainly funding and involved with supplying Hamas. And so what happened? The Egyptian secret police show up, accuse me of espionage. There's a standoff in the streets of Cairo, a raid on my hotel, and I just managed to get out of the country. This is Islam. This is what Islam is.
Yeah, it's in a sense a terrifying reality. It brings us back to two things that I want us to discuss. First of all, this Islamification of the United States. I mean, if you look just in not just Minneapolis, oddly enough, as much as we think of Texas as being a conservative state, if you look at the development of mosques, this mosque buildup in Texas over the past decade, it's actually quite shocking. There's a group called the Social Policy and Understanding, or the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, and they essentially count the mosques in the United States every 10 years. And in 2020, which was their last survey, they found that the number of mosques in Texas had grown by 35% since 2010. So 2010 to 2020, there were 166 mosques. In 2010, there were hundreds more by 2020. Hundreds more, 224. That's a very startling, jarring statistic, I think, because it's not just happening in Texas. That's also happening in other states. I mean, we think of Dearborn, we think of Minneapolis now because of what we've seen there, but this stuff tends to fly under the radar until our eyes are drawn to it because of a crime, an act of terror that's been committed from someone who resides within that vicinity. So I want to talk about that and what we can do about it. I also want to talk about how this relates to President Trump's attack on Iran. And some people might say, how on earth does the Islamification of the United States, how on earth is that connected in any way? Well, it is. I mean, the attack on Iran, and I want you to talk to me about this because this is where your expertise is. Talk to me about the terrorism we see here in the United States and how almost all of it ties back to Iran, and how what President Trump has done, what impact that will have on whether we here in the United States are actually going to be victims of this type of terror attack moving forward.
Well, I think there's been two huge developments in the United States that have led to the Islamification that you're talking about, Texas and elsewhere. And that is, for decades, the Arab world, Muslims who are seeking the Islamification of the West, and particularly the United States. It had been happening in Europe for a very long time, long before it started happening in the United States. They didn't know how to play the game in the West. And so they never had their Benjamin Netanyahu, meaning somebody who was liked by the American public, generally speaking, articulate, comes off as an American, understands our culture, and is quick on his feet. They've yet to find that kind of guy. And I don't think that Mondani is that. But what they have learned is that they can buy universities. They can buy armies of bots. You go and you tweet particularly things about Islam or Israel or whatever. Wait to see how long it takes for vile things. With having followers of two people, or something like this. They're bots. So they've learned that they can buy universities, they can buy protests. That's another thing that they can do, and they can buy influence. So that's one of the huge changes. The second is they've cracked the code on the path to political power in the United States. And the Trojan horse is socialism. So they know, they see the same polls that we see, that Islam, being a jihadist doesn't play well with the American public. Just go look at any Pew Forum, poll. You'll see that.
Look at Linda Sarsour if you want to think of this like in a concrete fashion. I mean, think about the Women's March, pardon the interruption, but think about the Women's March back in 2016 and how this was like the Democrats' pet project to counter Trump. And then when we exposed Linda Sarsour as being adjacent to jihadist is probably the kindest way, the most generous way of describing her, the whole thing came tumbling down because the American people, even at the time, I hope that still stands, although I think some of the left has been radicalized more since then. But even at the time, the left was like, wait a second, we don't want Islamists to be leading our movements. At the time, they were like, we just don't like Trump.
Yeah, well, exactly. And see, this is how we end up with this, so-called red-green alliance, the American left or the global left and the jihadists. But see, they have learned that socialism is their Trojan horse. They can package themselves as socialists when in fact they're jihadists. So, Ilhan Omar and Mandani and Saqib Khan and a variety of others that would fall into this particular category, they see that socialism polls very well among young people. And what are young people? Young people are the shock troops of any revolution. So those are two of the things that have changed that I think are huge. Now, to get to your question as to what we can do about it, I think Americans have to learn, understand what Islam actually is. And I think we're starting to catch up to it. I mean, just look at social media. You can tell, Americans are waking up to this. Interestingly enough, I was sounding the alarm about Islam before 9/11, and almost nobody was listening. After 9/11, I would say there was a brief bump where I was getting a lot of invitations to speak on this topic, but then it was like people forgot. They just weren't interested again, and now we're starting to see that people are starting to wake up to it again. So that's one thing. Another thing is Muslim, what we call the extremists, again, who are really Orthodox Muslims, they feel contempt for the West, and they feel contempt for men in the West because they generally see them as cowardly, which I kind of agree that there's an element of that. There's a beta
hopefully in a different way.
Yeah, there's a beta male. We've seen the rise of the Metro Man, the beta male, all of this that we've seen in the West. So there is that, but the West has to find its core. We have to find our courage. And why I say the way they perceive the West is they're used to making threats and seeing Westerners crumble under those threats. So that, for instance, I was doing a series for Fox News called The Forgotten Christians of Nigeria. So I was in Nigeria. Now you're hearing all this about how Christians aren't being persecuted there. They're being persecuted horribly. So arguably the most dangerous country in the world when you start getting into the north, which is where I was. But they're used to making threats in that kind of context, crowding around you and touching you and seeing white people, Westerners, crumble under that. You have to learn to play the game with them, and that is that you're not going to be easily intimidated. I'm not. You're going to respect my space. You will back off. I will debate you I've debated Muslims on Al Jazeera, CNN, International, but you know where the real radicals are? They meet in Hyde Park on Sunday afternoons at Speaker's Corner. So I've gone there several times with Jay Smith, who is now in the United States, but was there for 25 years. And Jay's a very dear friend of mine. And together we would go down there and we would take them on. And while you're debating, somebody will whisper in your ear, as soon as this is over, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to cut your throat.
Does someone say that to you?
Oh, yeah. People do that all the time. I recall a young woman, very brave, British young woman who was debating a Muslim there, and a guy came up to her and said, you're going to be the first person we rape when we take over this country. Again, I'm going to get you banned, Liz. But these are the kinds of things that happen, and they happen regularly. And I love her for this. She ignored him and just kept straight on with the debate. Not because she didn't think he didn't mean it. He did mean it. But the fact of the matter is, the effort was to try to intimidate her into, into wilting and fleeing Speaker's Corner. And she didn't do anything of the sort, nor did Jay or some other members of his team. But the point is, you have to be ready to do these kinds of things. And most Westerners are not accustomed to it. They don't know how to process this. And there is even, Liz, I'll say this, and I say this as somebody who loves Trump and has been to Mar-a-Lago several times. I wish I had an opportunity to sit down with the president and say, we have to be very careful with dealing with the Iranians, with dealing with the Gazans, with dealing with the Egyptians, because when you have inhaled so deeply of a Western a context which is largely based on a Christian worldview. It doesn't mean you're a Christian. You might be an atheist, but your worldview has been so deeply influenced by that you can't really conceive of real evil. You can't really conceive of somebody who really does want to rape your 6-year-old daughter, or really would cut your head off, who really would sell your wife into sex slavery. This is what Islam is. And there are people who are listening to this. I want to be very clear on this. I am not saying that every Muslim is a terrorist or would be terrorist. I have a number of Muslim friends, but they are my friends because they don't take their Islam seriously. You understand what I'm getting at? This is why I made the joke about Methodists, sort of earlier. I say this as a former Methodist, but I'm just simply making the point that any Muslim who takes Islam seriously, he is by definition a dangerous individual, because he believes that he has the right to kill you, to mutilate you, to rape members of your family, non-Muslim women. He has the right to do anything he wants to infidels. That's why we ended up in Rotherham, that case. Almost nobody in the United States knows anything about it. More than 250,000 British white girls, and I stress that's the Times of London that put it that way, were trafficked on an industrial scale. By who? Well, the Times initially, trying to be PC, said Asians. Thank God the Sikhs and the Chinese and the Koreans in Britain all came out and said, no, we're not the ones doing that. It's Muslims who are doing this, and specifically mostly Pakistanis and some Afghans. And to date, almost no one has really been held accountable for this. And that's because the system is designed to encourage it. And that's what's happened in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, and it's terrifying to see this creep. I mean, we've seen it in Europe. We've seen it for the past 10 years in Europe, and to see it now creeping closer and closer here at home is not something that we have this way. We don't have to accept this. This is the result of a deliberate political decision. Talk to me about the impact that Trump's attack on Iran is going to have on the Islamification of our country, but also these supposed sleeper cells that are, and when I say supposed, I'm not questioning whether they exist. I think there's a distinction between the attack in Texas, for example, seems to be inspired by this ideology versus being directly directed by a terror leader in Iran. We may find out differently in the future. That's just what the evidence appears to be at the beginning. Talk to me about the impact you think Trump's attack on Iran is going to have on terrorism here.
Well, it seems to be a good place to start with that is I went back and I got into it on Twitter with Matt Walsh.
I saw.
And Matt Walsh can be a bit of an ass. I like a lot of what Matt has to say, but he went on there and basically said that anybody who supported Trump's decision to bomb Iran, that they came up with their arguments 5 years ago. And my response to that was to say, Matt, I'm old enough to remember 1979. I'm old. I was 11 years old. The memory of the storming of our embassy in Tehran when the Iranian Revolution, so-called, swept the Ayatollahs, into power, and they held 66 Americans hostage, the whole country hostage, for 444 days, while an impotent President Carter did virtually nothing. We didn't come up with our desire to bomb Iran 5 minutes ago. We came up with it 47 years ago when people took an old, even then, an old Beach Boys song, Bob Iran, and changed it to Bomb Iran. I mean, so my generation, Gen X, has been looking forward to this moment for a very long time. And since that time, the Ayatollahs have killed Americans with impunity. And that's because they knew that Clintons and Carters and Bushes and Bidens and Obamas weren't going to do anything about it. And so more than 600, it's probably more in the neighborhood of 900 Americans have been killed. Listen, in the first 2.5 years of Biden's term in office, the Iranians either directly attacked or sponsored 83 attacks against U.S. troops in the Middle East. 83. So I don't see it as a case where it's mutually exclusive. Either you deal with what's going on at home or you deal with what's going on overseas. You have to deal with both. And I think I agree with people like Matt and friends of mine who say, I sure would like to see more deportations. I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
But Iran is the head of the terrorist snake. It's not the only head. This is a hydra. There are several heads. But, you know, I liken it to this, if I may, Liz, use kind of a homespun analogy. When my kids were very small, I live in the American South, they would occasionally get into these fire ant beds. And if you don't know what a fire ant is, I'm here to tell you, they will light you up. It only takes one of them and you know you have been bitten. So I was fighting this war of trying to get rid of the fire ant beds in my own yard. And I would no sooner would I get rid of one than it seemed like another one would spontaneously generate. And I realized the only way I'm going to rid my yard of them is if I can convince my neighbors to rid their yards of them as well. And when I did, suddenly we didn't have a fire ant problem anymore. And that's because they weren't just migrating straight back into my yard from the adjoining yards. This is America first. This is America first. Now, there's another crowd that says they're America first, but really what they are is they're America only. They're very short-sighted. They don't see the rest of the world the way I do, and they don't see what's going on around the world. And what's happening at home is being fueled from abroad. That's what's happening. And so I see this as America first. I don't see Ukraine as America first. This is America first. Venezuela is America first. And I trust President Trump that he's not going to get us into another Afghanistan or a Vietnam with loads of ground troops and this kind of thing that just stretches on in the so-called forever war. This to me was a sensible decision, and it's one that should have happened in 1979.
Yeah, I think most people in the Republican Party, with the exception of maybe some psycho senators who are neocons, but most of the Republican electorate feels the way that I do and the way that you do. We don't want a forever war in the Middle East. We recognize that that's a deliberate political decision. It's not necessary. It didn't have to happen in Iraq. It didn't have to happen in Afghanistan. Our politicians chose to commodify American service members to profit themselves, and it was horrible. That's blood money if there ever was an accurate definition of that. President Trump has been against forever war probably before anybody watching. He was the leader in the Republican Party in changing the philosophy of conservatism away from being, the world's policeman, away from being nation building. He spoke out about that before it was popular among conservatives. I share that. I do not want a forever war. I do trust Trump not to drag us into forever war because the best predictor of future behavior is past actions. And he's shown us that he can engage in military action, use the military, go in there, complete an operational objective and get out without making it a forever war. And I think that there's a false binary with some on the right that says if you use the military, it's going to automatically lead to a forever war. Therefore, I don't support the use of the U.S. military. I'd actually like to ask these people if there's any circumstance that they feel that the use of the U.S. military is justified, because I've never heard them support the use of the U.S. military without acting as if it's going to automatically lead to a forever war. But I don't want to wait until our homeland is attacked again to use the U.S. military to go and invade a country. I would rather engage in an attack that, again, another, in my opinion, false narrative is that this was a preemptive attack by Trump. It's not a preemptive attack when 1,000 Americans have been killed over the course of the past decades. It is an attack that was based on the timing, meaning we had the best chance of success, but also the smallest chance of conventional retaliation and the smallest chance of a forever war happening as a result of this. That to me is a matter of timing, not a matter of, oh, we attacked first because we wanted to bomb Iran. It's a very big difference.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And people are underestimating what Iran has been doing. The Biden administration essentially funded Iranian terrorist attacks, not just October 7th, but they funded other terrorist attacks with Hezbollah and Hamas, and attacks in other parts of the globe, and attacks against the United States. And how did they do that? Now, most famously, everyone is aware of the $1.7 billion of literal pallets of cash that the Obama administration sent over to Iran. But the Biden administration sent far more than that. They released funds that $6 billion that the Trump administration had frozen in his first administration. They released that. So gave that immediately to the Iranians. It's like they were saying, yeah, you've attacked us 83 times and killed, hundreds of our people. Here's $6 billion. Thank you for that. Then they ended Trump era, again, first term, Trump era oil embargoes, which allowed the Iranians to increase their oil exports by 80%, which of course was a flood of cash. And then they gave them $10 billion in sanction waivers. So, I mean, think about this. Where all of a sudden, how is Iran able to fund all these things? The Biden administration was playing both arsonist and fireman. And in October 7th, in this part of the argument in the article that I published with the Federalist, is that the Biden administration has gotten off of the hook for the fact that they were funding terrorism. And I go back to my very firsthand personal experience where my life was in danger when I am outside of USAID in Cairo, where it's clear that particular compound, which is a fortress, I ended up putting all this, and by the way, I got home and suddenly I was swatted. 19 armed men in body armor surrounded my house. Is there any connection? Sure seems like they're probably USAID agency that I was giving testimony to the Congressional Oversight Committee, and their questions to me were effectively this: tell us what's going on at USAID Cairo. And my response was to say, guys, you can begin to see the problem when you are high-ranking, government officials, federal government officials, asking me what's going on at a U.S. government, federal government agency that was given $50 billion a year, and almost nobody knows where it was going. Well, I can tell you where it was going. A lot of it was going into funding terrorism.
It's horrendous. And this kind of circles us back to where we started the show. The Islamification of the United States obviously poses an existential threat to the safety and security of our families and our communities. And yet in this moment, we literally just experienced an Islamist attack on Saturday night. As we face this, U.S. senators refuse to fund the Department of Homeland Security to keep us safe. I mean, the gall of these people, it's unbelievable. Larry, I appreciate your experience and your insight on this and your courage in speaking out so much. Where can people find you online?
They can find me on Twitter at Larry Taunton. That's Taunton. And they can find me at LarryAlexTaunton.com. Thanks for having me, Liz. I'm going to go eat a big steak and then I'm going to go home.
Well, I hope you enjoy it. I hope it's safer there than it feels in our country at the moment. All right, guys, well, let me check the YouTube comments because we want to get your input on this topic. Yes, the statistics are shocking. I see many of you noting that the statistics are shocking about the ideology of Muslims in America. Larry will definitely join us on the show again. Dixie Dog says Dearborn, Michigan residents have repeatedly challenged the volume of loudspeakers, citing a city ordinance against unreasonably loud noise. Now, what Dixie Dogs is referencing is the Islamist prayers that are blasted into Dearborn, Michigan from the loudspeakers owned by the city. I mean, you want to talk about Sharia law, you want to talk about a Muslim takeover of an American city. That's what's happening in Dearborn, and residents have to resort to saying, oh, there's an ordinance against unreasonably loud noise in order to reduce the imposition of the religion of Islam on their daily lives. It's absolutely shocking.